If you're from a risk of high deforestation, it will take potentially quite a bit longer and your shipments will be delayed. There will be additional costs associated with that. And one of the other challenges with the way the system is designed is that level of risk is determined by the aggregate of commodities, not by any one commodity. So what they mean is if your country is at a high risk of deforestation for palm oil, then any other commodity from that same country, including coffee, will be reviewed as if it is at higher risk when it is imported into the EU.
Friends, we have an announcement. On October 28, 29 and 30, Mapple Forward is proud to present the first of its kind live online event titled Introduction to Regenerative Coffee Farming. This workshop will happen live in 3 different events in English, Spanish and Portuguese to help coffee producers and the rest of us in the coffee industry understand regenerative ag and how to implement it so that coffee farmers stand a chance at surviving these brutal weather conditions long into the future. It will also help us understand how we can talk about regenerative ag to our customers. This live online presentation will be led by highly specialized and experienced agronomists, coffee producers, and agricultural engineers who have worked transforming coffee farms from conventional farms to regenerative farms and agroforestry around the world. Tickets are $10 for coffee producers and $150 for everybody else. When you pay $150 though, you're securing your ticket and the ticket of 14 other coffee producers that didn't quite have the funds to pay for their own tickets. Not only does your ticket buy you access to the workshop, but it also gives you access to newly formed WhatsApp groups, one in English, one in Spanish, one in Portuguese, where people can continue to exchange information and ideas about regenerative ag before and after the workshops. For more details, head to mappleforward.coffee/workshops. Check the link in the show notes for details and help us spread the word about this workshop by sharing our posts on social media. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 2 of a 5-part series with Andrew Hetzel, where we're talking about the details of EUDR. And in the last episode, we spoke about the purpose of EUDR. In this episode, Andrew, we're going to talk about the technical details involved in EUDR. The first question I have is, how complicated is EUDR?
It depends on how deep into it you delve. At a very high level, it's not that complicated because what the EU is asking for is that you provide a statement that the commodities you're producing are produced legally and they're produced without deforestation.
Wait.
So
let me ask you there.
Conceptually.
Wait. That's a really interesting point that you've just said there. So they're asking you to validate.
Yeah.
Who's the you?
You is whoever is putting the good for sale on the European market, that operator or trader.
Okay, help me. If you don't mind, I'd really like to stick here a little bit with regards to the details.
Yes.
Okay, so the you there is the importer. What happens to the person who buys green coffee off of an importer and then sells it as roasted coffee or as cups of coffee? What is their responsibility?
They are also liable.
They
are as liable as the importer, who then have to maintain some information about the chain of custody of that product going back to the origin country. So that's when things get really scary for coffee roasters, for coffee retailers as well, to know that the products they're selling are in compliance, because the EU has hard-coded fines into this legislation, and any firm that is caught not compliance of offering deforestation-free coffee on the market in Europe could be subject to 4% fine of their annual turnover.
Wow. So I suspect that the big corporates are looking at this with quite some seriousness, because 4% is enough to put them out of business.
Yeah, it's a huge risk premium, right? So you need to make sure that wherever you're buying from, the data, you can follow that paper trail essentially back to the source of production, so that if there is an audit that is called, you can be able to supply the auditors with the necessary information for them to trace that material back to its source.
Now, I attended an ICO webinar probably about this time last year, where they, or maybe earlier this year, where they were talking, and I saw your name in the group. You were there.
Yeah.
And they were talking about how when it comes to filling in the data for EUDR, it's not quite clear what should be filled in and where. So it's not as though they have standardized the process for EUDR compliance. Am I understanding that correctly?
That has actually been improved. That has been improved, but that is a recent improvement. So there is an online system. I have not used it. I've not seen it. I also don't import or export coffee from Europe. So, there is an automated system which the EU reports is online and functional as of this date to supply that information. And that is only as of, your information is not out of date. That's only as of this month. So it took time for this, some of these systems to come online, with the original expectation that the rules would go into force January 1.
It's like late October.
Yes, that is correct. This was like 2 weeks ago.
In my old life, I used to help massive big companies transition from one data system to the next. That was my project management that I did with IBM. It just blows my mind that 20 years later we still haven't got any better at transitioning these systems. Yeah. So having said that, what are the other details, the technical details of EUDR that we need to be aware of?
Okay, so, high level, has to be legal, no deforestation, needs to be traceable to its source. So those are the primary requirements. And then there's another sort of overarching requirement, which hasn't been implemented yet and hasn't been fully articulated yet, which is there is a risk level of deforestation which will be assigned to every country or region around the world. And their risk levels have been named low, medium, and high, which will correspond with the risk of ongoing deforestation from that area and impact the level of scrutiny that is given to the imports from that region. Mm-hmm. So, if you are from a country with a low risk of deforestation, your imports will sail through the system faster with less chance of inspection. And if you're from a risk of high deforestation, it will take potentially quite a bit longer and your shipments will be delayed. There will be additional costs associated with that. And one of the other challenges with the way the system is designed is that level of risk is determined by the aggregate of commodities, not by any one commodity. So what they mean is if your country is at a high risk of deforestation for palm oil, then any other commodity from that same country, including coffee, will be reviewed as if it is at higher risk when it is imported into the EU.
What could go wrong?
Essentially, there's a differential, a risk differential, which is going to be assigned by the EU to coffee producers worldwide that will increase the complexity and cost of imports of their products, only their products, into the EU.
And who's going to determine that differential?
They have a group called the EU Observatory, which, I have not seen the full details of how it's being decided. That piece of the legislation regulation was already intended to come into force later. So right now, everybody is at a medium level of risk. So they are going to implement that at some later date, which may be in the new guidance that came out just a couple of weeks ago. I didn't see it though.
the complexity of this is quite wild, hey, because they want to do the right thing. And what they're saying is, we feel like we're the problem because we consume so much coffee and we need to have a
Correct.
standard, right? And I think that that's noble. But then what they're doing by taking accountability is being very colonial and saying, we are going to defer the responsibility of that onto the producers and make you grow coffee a different way so that we can buy it off you.
Correct. That is the approach.
A mind fuck, if you don't mind me saying. That is, well, because it's really, really complex if you start to look at the depth of what we're really looking at in this shift. And if it's adopted and if it works well, this is something that could spread all over the world. And I deeply believe that this is going to change the way that the supply chain organizes itself.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question of that. I mean, there's a lot of sort of ethical issues you need to consider. I mean, especially if you think about coffee is a commodity that was brought to the world by Europe.
Right.
So
back to colonialism.
It was the Dutch, it was the British, it was the French, it was the Portuguese that brought coffee essentially around the world and, saddled them with this production. And now they're saying, oh, well, we've found the new religion of environmental responsibility, so you need to comply with that, and it's at your cost. But unfortunately, that is the case.
But the part of it that I think I didn't mention that drives it to the depth of the complexity is that the thing that caused producers, arguably, the thing that caused producers to lean into this idea of having to cut down more trees is the price of coffee, which was driven by those in consuming countries. And now what we're saying is, let's say we're in Europe, we the Europeans were a big part of creating this problem. You coffee producing countries are responsible for fixing it if you want us to continue to buy your coffee. So let's punish the people for our crimes.
Yeah, and I would even take that a step further, because it isn't often my experience that I see coffee producers who are cutting down trees specifically to grow more coffee.
Yeah.
When I'm doing work in Papua New Guinea, when I'm doing work in Timor-Leste, when I'm doing work in other places, even Uganda, coffee grows pretty well in shaded areas. In fact, in many cases, it prefers to, certainly for the quality of production, that shade growing slows the maturation cycle, improves the chemistry inside the coffee, makes it more dense. But oftentimes deforestation, in my experience, is simply as a result of poverty. These are people that have very little resources available to them. Maybe they live in a forested area or at the edge of a forested area. When they're cutting down trees, it's for fuel, it's for building
Housing.
material. It's because of rapid population expansion, where maybe they have 5 or 6 or 8 kids. Well, those kids are growing up and they need houses of their own too, and they're in an area with extreme poverty, so they're going to cut down trees and they're going to build a new house. So I wouldn't say that coffee is necessarily, they're not saying, ooh, we're going to make a whole bunch more money selling coffee to Europe. It's really more about survival and extreme poverty, where the forest is just there as a resource to support their life, not to necessarily give them potential of greater business. So I think that is another issue in many of the least developed countries where coffee is produced. This isn't really, coffee is something that allows them to earn some cash to make a living. And in many countries, it's one of the few foreign exchange earning products they can produce that has a global market with ready demand. But I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a lot of planning or even intent to cut down forests specifically for the purpose of growing coffee.
Now, on the technical side of that, Andrew, how does it work with regards to, let's say there's the majority of PNG is not cutting down trees, and then a small portion of PNG is cutting, like, let's say 1% of coffee producers are cutting down trees in PNG. Does that impact just that producer or the whole of PNG?
It would impact any coffee production that is in that immediate area.
How are they defining immediate area?
Okay, so if you delve down deeper into the technical requirements, we start to see some of the challenges that these producers are going to face. Because part of the disclosure that you need to provide for traceability is the GPS plot of every farm or place where the commodity is farmed, or a what's it called, a polygon that's surrounding surrounding any area greater than 4 hectares that is a single unit of a farm, and then satellite maps that demonstrate there's been deforestation in that area since 2020, since January of 2020, or December of 2020, I can't remember, it's in the legislation, but essentially that the production area needs to be defined and evaluated with satellite tech to confirm that there's been no deforestation in that area. I don't remember exactly what the limits are in terms of distance, but they want granular data to say, okay, if we're up each from 100 producers in a community, we want to know where each of those 100 producers is farming, and then we're going to compare it to the maps since there's any deforestation that's happening in that area. So in your theoretical situation where there is deforestation that's happening in some area of western province of PNG, it's not going to impact something that's happening in coffee production in the highlands at all. But you do have to have a GPS point of each of the producers, and if you've got a country like Uganda, you've got a couple million. You have a country like Papua New Guinea, several 100,000 producers who are operating in areas that are usually fixed. Sometimes they move from place to place, but they need to somehow be able to track, record the GPS point, and then transmit that data through the supply chain to the mill so that there's a GPS point associated with that production when it is exported on ship.
What I'm about to ask you, to any coffee producers that are listening, please know that I ask this with the deepest of respect. How much do coffee producers care about anybody's GPS coordinates?
Oh, they don't. They don't care at all. But I think what we find though is that coffee producers are also generally in favor of deforestation. They get it. They don't want to.
They want deforestation or don't want. They're in favor of deforestation.
They don't want deforestation.
They don't want it.
Yeah, they're in favor. They're in favor of this type of legislation.
Right.
But there's a couple of things here. First of all, they're probably not aware of it. So very few of the farmers in remote areas certainly are aware of what EUDR is or what these rules are, or in some cases what the GPS points are. Mm-hmm. But they just want to sell their product. So
which is hard enough anyway.
The danger, which is already hard enough, but a point is coming where there will be traders who will be purchasing coffee from a village in exchange for rice or whatever other services that these intermediary traders provide to the communities. And they're just going to say, I'm sorry, I can't take your product. And the farmer's not going to understand why. And it's going to be as a result, it's those community groups who have not, been linked to the right groups or exporters who've been able to assist them with collecting the data that's necessary so that they can continue to export to the EU, assuming that's a market for their product.
That sounds like the perfect segue into, because it sounds like exactly there that's a challenge. that producers are going to face
Yes.
around EUDR and why it's problematic. Join us in the next episode, folks, where we're going to start to really drill down on these kinds of challenges and why they're problematic for the entire coffee industry. So join us for that. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, friends. Please don't forget to show us some love by subscribing, liking, commenting, and most of all, sharing this podcast with your friends. Check the show notes for links, including our sponsors and our Patreon. And stay tuned for more great conversations on the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward.